You're listening to Big World Network.
Bloodshot Buck, Season 2, Episode 2. Written by W.H. Wood and Mitch K. Allan. Read by Willow Wood. As instructed, Azuma dropped Ava off at her shared quarters.
You may visit the mess and the practice building, but that is all,
he said.
Será más.
He nodded his head and left. Heavy and worn out, Ava sank down on one of the benches at the center table. She stared at the room, her mind blank. She barely had a chance to register that it was only 600 in the morning before the door hissed open and Michael stormed inside, breathing heavily. He carried in the cold from outdoors, smelling of sweat and deodorant.
Buck! You're okay! What's going on? No one's talking!
His wiry black hair stuck out in all directions like an overworked horsebrush.
If no one's talking, I probably shouldn't tell you, she said.
Michael's eyes widened in frustration and he dived forward, one hand on the table, leaning over her in preparation to argue.
But maybe I'll wet your sticky beak over brekkie, she hurried on.
What?
Ava stood up and gave his cheek a gentle tap.
Means you're nosy.
They didn't make it halfway down the road before Michael bullied the news out of her. She didn't even know where to start.
My justicate murdered someone and fled the quarter,
she said. Seemed as good a place as any. Just as Ava finished describing the image of Neni's blood form, they joined the breakfast queue and she felt very aware of the few other Marines around them. The small orchestra of cutlery and muttered conversation only made Ava sound 10 times louder than normal. Many soldiers still had to be at their posts. She clamped her mouth shut, nausea wobbling her insides together as the chef piled her plate with hot food.
"Where's Sterling?"
she asked as they sat down in one of the far corners of the room, right at the end of a long table. The hall's dim lighting and grey decor felt good on the eyes.
"Beats me. I haven't seen him since this morning. Maybe they sent him straight on to guard duty? I know he was on the rota."
Ava nodded, took 2 mouthfuls of beans, and couldn't stomach any more. Why would Neni kill to escape? Michael wolfed down his breakfast, watching Ava intently whenever he paused to chew. When he was done, he got straight to his feet and said, "If you ever need an alibi, I got your back." She smiled and nodded.
"Anyway, I got one-on-one now. What are you gonna do, seeing as Neni's flown the rock?"
Ava had contemplated this earlier, during the awkward march back to her barracks with Azuma. She knew exactly what to do. 10 minutes later, after leaving the mess together, Ava waved Michael goodbye. She stormed into the practice building's gym, alone, and chose a spot where her back faced the glass wall looking into the foyer. If she drowned her body in exhaustion, maybe the gnawing betrayal she felt would bleed away. Besides, Ava hadn't been pushing herself hard enough. She couldn't remember the last time she tried to meet the basic fitness requirements. Stepping onto a treadmill, she set off at a sprint. Her first test, on the day she had signed up for the Marines, had been a 3-mile run split into 2 parts. The July chill had bitten her arms, and her feet had ached from pounding against the frost-packed earth, but she'd never fallen behind. Ava finished the first 1.5 miles in 14 minutes. She punched the control panel in frustration and stumbled backwards off the mill. 2.5 minutes slow. Her head spiraled with dizziness, stomach twisted in revolt. Thank God she hadn't eaten much breakfast.
When was Neni conscripted? How long has she been here?
Yeah, real helpful questions. Shaking her head and measuring her breaths, Ava strode over to the bar. She stared up at it and ground her teeth. Any good Marine could manage at least 70 pull-ups. Ava's personal best was 80. With one push, she leapt up and grabbed hold of the bar, locking out her elbows and certifying a strong grip. She glared out across the gym and at the 7 other synths minding their own business. Who forced Neni into being a synth? 1. Maybe she wasn't forced. Maybe she mutated herself. 2. Did her time here mean nothing? Doesn't she like protecting people? 3. Does she hate me? By the time Ava managed to pull her chin above the mark a 20th time, her arms already trembled. She stopped and hung from the bar for a while, panting like an oversized jelly. She blinked hard, trying to clear her swirling, blotchy vision. It didn't work. Her head began to throb. Clenching the bar and suppressing a frustrated shout, Ava forced her arms to pull her up again and again and again. 40, she hissed, just as a bright red drone burst into view. It bobbed before Ava's blurry eyes and she winced. What?
Private Buck,
it said in a familiar tone of voice.
You've been summoned by First Just Inquisitor Sato. Sounds like someone's in the shit.
Ava dropped to the ground and massaged her rubbery arms. Bite. The spherical drone fluxed in brightness, and Ava turned away.
Hurry up and get dressed. Honestly, you people are slower than dial-up.
Nothing's that slow, Ava muttered. Wait, did Bite say Inquisitor? Heart hammering, stomach flipping, Ava rushed to the changing rooms and flung herself into the showers. When she finally followed Bite outside, she congratulated herself on using the gym. She felt sturdy, despite the tightness compressing her lungs together, and marched down the long straight road towards the cough. To her surprise, she spotted James striding towards a side street that led to the shooting range. Ava called out his name, and his face came alive like she'd never seen it before. He sprinted over and seized one of her shoulders. "Ava, you're Justicate! She's gone, isn't she?" he cried. She leant away, as if knocked back by his loud demand. "Right, you got the memo then?" James shook his head and waved his other hand. "News has spread. I can't believe she would—" His fingers dug into her shirt, and Ava resisted the urge to push him off. He must have had a shit morning, running around in the wake of Neni's escape. "Did they question you much?" he asked. "Do you know what she did exactly? Can't believe this has happened. She's—" He gave Ava a painful shake, and she managed to slip away.
Get back to your schedule, Synth,
snapped Bite.
The Inquisitor is waiting.
James stared at the chuggling little drone like he hadn't noticed it until now. "Inquisitor?" Ava shrugged, offered a weak smile, and agreed to fill him in later. She was becoming far too familiar with the Cough's orange body scanner and rectangular lobby. The blast shields had been raised, revealing the enormous window that looked out onto married quarters and civilian workplaces, and a semblance of order hung in the air. Security, for one, was doubled with synths and non-synths alike. No doubt that rubbed a few superiors the wrong way. It had taken Ava a while to figure out the military powers pissing each other up the wall, but one of her instructors had tried to lay it out for her a couple of days earlier. Despite the quarter being a synth base and the synths being governed by Justicates, there was a smaller military presence of bog-standard humans with no spooky blood powers whatsoever. These bogs were managed largely by Major Xing. This garrison had no real jurisdiction over synths or Justicates, but their support didn't fool anyone. The non-synth garrison was stationed out there as political and tactical insurance, representing the governments of Earth and Mars, there to take down a synth revolution, should that occur. 2 armies sharing the same space, with Major Xing running the asteroid and his people on it, and the Justicates running the synths. A hotbed of stripe rivalry. Just what a base 50 k's south of Whoop Whoop needed. Power tensions. Bite led Ava down the same corridor Azuma had dragged her down earlier that morning. The red drone paused in front of a different black door, however.
I'd open it for you, but I'm not allowed,
said Bite in a lofty tone. Then she whizzed off and left Ava standing there by herself. Hesitant, she knocked on the door. She'd barely dropped her hand to her side before it snapped open and a familiar face greeted her. Well, not that familiar. Fumbling and swallowing against her dry tongue, Ava saluted the woman who had questioned her about the demolition criminals, what felt like eons ago. The Inquisitor's dark eyes raked Ava from head to foot as she raised her pointed chin, shaking strands of her bob-cut hair out of her face. Like last time, Ava's gaze was drawn to the grey-brown fragments of carapace embedded in the Inquisitor's cheekbones and the lumpy ridges trailing down her neck. A symptom of remorphing her body so many times. Would the woman eventually look more Catharian than human? "Come inside," she said, haughty expression creasing with a smug smile. Ava ducked into the room and saw another girl, perhaps a bit younger than her, sat at the table. The girl was rigid as a totem pole, red lips pursed and brown curls falling stylishly from the bun on top of her head. She snuck glances at Ava from beneath her lashes. "Sit down," said the Inquisitor. Ava sat beside Miss Lashes. "I am First Just Inquisitor Sato. I've got an asteroid full of people to see today, so you've both been summoned at the same time to save me, as well as you, a couple hours of needless fucking around." Sato forced a tight smile, her tone so buttery sweet it somehow churned Ava's stomach harder. Ava studied Sato's coal-black uniform and the golden trim around her shoulders. When Sato turned to pick up a tan-coloured glove from the shelf, Ava saw the large golden print on her back, an Anashim knife with 2 white stars on the flat of the blade. Sato pulled on the glove, wiggling her fingers until it fit like a second layer of skin, then tapped her palm twice. "Voice record," she said. A yellowish hologram popped up above her hand and undulated with audio waves. Her piercing gaze fell on Miss Lashes first. Ava heard the girl swallow, but she didn't flinch away. "Miss Clara Grayson," said Sato, clearly and slowly in the direction of the recording. "Trainee nurse, born on quarter, 18 years old, and school friends with the accused, Tristan Potts. Correct?" Clara sniffed. "Well, I don't know about friends." Sato raised her pointed chin again, assessments processing behind her eyes. "A couple of months ago, you filed a suspicious persons report about Tristan as he wandered about the synth wards in the hospital. Do you recall this?" Ava dared to sneak a look at Clara. The girl looked pale, and she clenched her teeth so hard it distorted her jawline. Clara nodded. "Speak for the recording, please." "Yes." Clara shuffled in her seat, painted lips wobbling a little. She cleared her throat. "Tristan works in the kitchens. It was unusual to see him at the hospital." "Why was he there?" "He had a delivery to make. To the synth wards. He was very excited to see synths." One of Sato's eyebrows rose. Ava blinked. The hospital. That bubbly kid who had chatted to her whilst she was settling. Was he a Dristan or a Tristan? She couldn't remember. It had been so long ago, and she had been tired and croaky, full of drugs that week. She could only half recall what they'd spoken about. The conversation had a vague, dreamlike quality to it. "And what was Tristan delivering?" Sato asked, jerking Ava back to the present. Clara opened her mouth to speak, but paused. "I don't know." "You don't know? Or you don't remember?" One hand shakily rose to Clara's face, but she tugged it back down again. "He didn't put the package in the scanner. He had orders not to." "I see," Sato said, and whilst her unconcerned tone dripped of honey, even Ava had to admit that this sounded very suspicious person. I gave him 40 minutes to complete his delivery, Clara continued.
But he didn't make it back in that time?
No, Mum. Even if he got lost, well, I could have done it in 40 minutes. Sato pulled out the chair on her side of the desk and sat down. She laced her fingers together into a tent, one hand phasing through the holographic audio waves on her left palm.
Thank you, Miss Grayson.
She turned to Ava.
Which brings us to you, Private Buck. We have video footage of Tristan entering your room during your settling treatment. Is that correct?
No wonder the soup tastes like mop water. The kid Ava remembered had definitely been Tristan the cook. Yes, Ava coughed. I don't remember it very well, though. Sato gestured to the recording on her hand.
A little louder for the microphone, please.
Yes, he did visit me. We'd never met before. He was lost. The thin-lipped smile that spread across Sato's cheeks was too wide, too frog-like. Chunks of melted cheek carapace clinked softly against her rigid cheekbones.
Was he?
She asked.
Did you really believe that?
Did she believe that? She'd thought he was funny, that he was a breath of fresh air, that he was ditzy enough to lose his way down the yellow brick road, never mind a hospital. Of course he'd been lost. He'd said that, hadn't he? Had he? Remember, how did that conversation go? Why did he burst into the room like that? He was out of breath, Ava mumbled. She glanced at the recorder and tried raising her voice a little. Like he'd been running. Suspicious person. I'm sorry, Ava said. I don't see what this has to do with anything. The Inquisitor's froggy smile was more like a crocodile, now that Ava noticed. Like a crocodile sat serenely under the surface of the water, waiting for something to come along and take a drink. Her large, glassy eyes didn't blink once, and Ava frowned, concerned that Sato could discern her deepest thoughts, pluck the pieces straight from her head.
Well, Private Buck, it has a lot to do with everything. I was under the impression you had seen the footage of Justice Prout's escape.
I did.
Then perhaps you will recall a civilian amongst her party.
Ava's stomach plummeted. She could see how Neni and that Ark guy could wind up getting involved in each other's plots. But
that was Tristan Potts, Sato said. He claimed to be a hostage, but we have significant evidence otherwise.
What evidence? Sato's eyebrows flickered into a frown and back again so quickly, Ava thought she'd imagined it.
I'm the Inquisitor here, she said in a light, joking tone.
Ava managed a breath of forced laughter. Of course. Crocodile. A squeaking noise made them both turn towards Clara, fidgeting in her seat, clearly thinking her part was over and she could leave now. Inquisitor Sato said nothing to her and went back to Ava.
So Tristan Potts, who you had never met before, arrives in your room, lost. It is some minutes before our cameras see him leave, so I presume that you talked?
Yes. Sato spread her hands again.
Anything you'd like to share?
Nope. It was a long time ago. I was heavily medicated. I think demolition? Yes, it was before the trial. We talked about that. The two synths who fought when I arrived on the station.
A very morbid subject of conversation for a new recruit.
Not really, Ava said evenly. It was big news and I was the unnamed witness, wasn't I?
Did he already know your involvement in the incident?
No, I told him that. And about Neni. Ouch. That hurt. Thinking of NENI-LOHI, surrounded by all that hanging blood. How she strode into the room like a confident hero. How she'd made herself Ava's idol in just 5 minutes. I told him about the whole thing, Ava said in a rush.
Very sensitive details to share with a stranger, don't you think? Considering the trial had not begun and the news coverage was deliberately patchy at best.
Ava took a deep breath. Don't lose your temper with this half-human, half-alien, all-predator. She's called the Inquisitor.
We were gossiping. If I had to sum up his character in one word, I would have called him a gossip.
Really? Tristan just happens to get a delivery to somewhere he is never known to work. Just happens to get lost in the synth wards, and just happens to run into the biggest news story of the year? My, Mr. Potts certainly had a busy day. Did he just happen to ask about your former teacher, Justice Prout?
Yes, he did.
Private Buck, is it within the realm of possibility that Tristan feigned ignorance of who you were to draw out some, shall we say, gossip regarding NENI-LOHI?
Ava stared at the desk. He didn't seem bright enough, but yes, you could be right. More smiling, more sugar, more honey from Miss Sato.
I try to be.
Yuck.
Did you meet Tristan again?
No, that's the last time I saw him. Clara's chair squeaked across the floor, and Ava and Sato's gazes met hers.
Something to say, Miss Grayson?
Clara had definitely stuck her head into the lake with no idea of whose jaws were stretching wide to snap at her. It's probably nothing. Sato blinked. Slowly. Tristan did say he met Buck several times, Clara said, as though the words were being tugged out of her.
I thought you weren't friends,
Sato asked Clara. No, but he is a gossip. He liked to boast, but I think that's all it was. He didn't even get your name right. He kept calling you Bucky. Ava suppressed a smirk. Bucky? Well, it served her right for thinking he was a Tristan.
I think we can dismiss that one as idle chatter,
Sato said.
You'll be glad to hear that we're almost done. Whether Mr. Potts is a criminal or a bumbling idiot remains to be seen, but it appears you have both been victims rather than accomplices. Lastly, did he ever mention or ask you about the Anishim knives?
Ava assumed this question was directed at her. No, not that I can recall.
He seemed fascinated by synths, but also very cautious of them, especially Justicates. Although, who wasn't?
You seem to have picked up a great deal from this short chat with him,
Sato said, although she looked pleased to hear it.
Miss Grayson?
Miss Grayson was clearly a few moments away from completely snapping. She sat bolt upright in her seat and looked through the wall opposite her. Definitely too much time under Inquisition. Definitely too many honeyed smiles. Sorry? She squeaked.
Anishim knives,
Sato repeated. To me? No. I've never seen one. Just what you get on the vid shows. Clara even managed a small laugh. Why? Inquisitor Sato hesitated.
Recording complete,
she said to her glove. The yellow hologram faded out. Sato sighed, folded her hands together and looked at them both.
Our evidence is that Tristan wound up with Justice Prout that evening because he was sneaking through the armory with fake ID, trying to steal an Anishim knife, which he then passes to Captain Chelik, and we all know what happens next.
With that, the Inquisitor stood up, tucking her chair in. Things didn't get more suspicious person than that, Ava had to concede glumly. She'd been played. Again. Clara, however, appeared totally floored. What? She mumbled. Maybe they were friends after all. Was Clara his girlfriend? Did she file those complaints as a joke? She didn't look like she was joking.
You seem surprised, Miss Grayson,
Sato said, as though she were making idle conversation and not continuing her line of questioning. Tristan wouldn't know which end of an Anishim knife to hold. Ex-girlfriend? Definitely his ex-girlfriend. My shift is about to start, Clara said, stumbling across the room.
Yes, you're dismissed,
Sato said, although she needn't have bothered, as Clara was already halfway out the door. Like a macabre doll, with its permanent, cheery expression and unblinking stare, Sato's head swiveled back to Ava.
Thank you for your easy cooperation,
she said.
I do hate having to claw the truth out of people.
Ava nodded and offered a weak smile.
Buck, you're dismissed. Your fieldcraft instructor has requested you in the tech lab.
And with that, Sato flung open the door and held it open with one sturdy arm.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to BigWorldNetwork.